Welcome, Man, Mar, and Beast to a very, very special video. Today we're doing something a little bit different. It is I, Bellz The Moonclaw, and today we are going to be doing a book review of the two official canon Elder Scrolls novels. Now, originally, I thought to myself, wow, I haven't read those in like 6 or 7 years. I should reread them and then do a review. Then I thought, do you know what would be more fun? Not rereading them and doing a review anyway. So that's right, we're going to be doing a review of these with only the things that I remember from 6 or 7 years ago when I read it. Cat. The things I remember do not include character names, for instance, and probably huge chunks of the plot. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. I am Brick. Really? On the intro? On the intro. So, we're going to have a ton of fun reviewing these books only with what I remember. This should be interesting. And again, these are canon, official, licensed novels. They're the only ones in existence. We're going to talk about probably why that is. But before we get into the full-on review, including spoilers, hopefully, because I think I remember most of the main things. But before that, we're going to do a brief non-spoiler overview for those of you who maybe want to pick them up yourself or don't trust me to remember anything about them, which is fair.
Just a little disclaimer before we begin the official review. Obviously, as I've said, I don't really remember these as well as I probably would if I reread them. And also, of course, book reviews are super subjective. People have varying opinions. I've kind of heard opinions all over the board about these two books. I've heard some people love them, other people not love them, everything in between. So I am a very picky reader. This is just my opinion, and mostly this is just to have some fun. So definitely take my words with a little pinch of salt, and keep in mind that, as I said, I don't remember these very well. And let's get into the review without further ado.
So let's start with the important question. Are these books good? No. Are these books bad? Also, strangely, no. They are painfully slightly below average, is what I would say. There's a lot of really great stuff. Some stuff that's like, oh wow, this is definitely Elder Scrolls. And then there's a lot of stuff that really just makes this, for me, a solid 2 out of 5 stars. We're going to get into it in my main review. But if you want to read these, I think that every Elder Scrolls fan should probably read them since they are considered canon. But I would probably say don't have like super high expectations, and also I paid full price for them, and I would say if you can get them on sale to do that. I think I paid $7.99 for the first one and then like $10 for the second one. I don't know that that's as much as you should pay since they are kind of average. The other thing I will say, and this is non-spoiler, but this should not have been a duology. This should have 100% been a single book. There's a lot of fluff that goes nowhere and is not necessary in these books, and I think that having it be 2 books really made it suffer a lot. There's a ton I think could have been cut, and I think if it had been just a slightly longer single book, probably would have enjoyed it a lot more. Other non-spoiler thoughts on these. The writing style is okay. There is multiple POVs of characters. There is a lot of Elder Scrolls like references and lore in there, but there's also a lot that is not Elder Scrolls like lore or important or anything. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Characters, I didn't really think they were that great. Some people I've talked to loved them, so that's going to be more of a personal preference. So, non-spoiler review, the best way I can describe it is these 2 books, they are the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard of books. Redguard was a game, wasn't bad, wasn't great, didn't really feel like Elder Scrolls completely, but kind of sort of did. That is this book series. That is these two books. It is the Elder Scrolls Redguard of books. It doesn't feel quite right, but it doesn't feel like it's totally not canon. It exists. Solid, average, little below average in my opinion, series of books. But now that the non-spoiler review is out of the way, we're going to go through what I remember of these. And I hope that you will all join me on this adventure, because that's what it's going to be. Let's get started. Alright, so we are starting with book 1, The Infernal City. Pretty cool cover art, I have to say. Also, fair warning as we go through this, my cats are hanging around, Emmerich and Nathaniel. You're probably going to see them. One of them has already made a cameo. I'm sorry, they like to be involved with everything that I do. So prepare for some cute cat cameos. But anyway, moving on. This is the first book out of 2. And again, bear with me because it's been 6 or 7 years since I've read this. I will tell you what I remember and then we'll kind of just gloss over what I don't. We open the book, if I remember, in the city of Lilmoth. That's in Murkmire in Blackmarsh. And we are introduced to the first of our main characters. Again, I don't remember anybody's name, and I could have looked it up, but I think it's going to be way more fun if I just give them new names. So the first character we meet, she is a Breton, and she was trained in alchemy, but isn't an alchemist. If I remember, it was very weird. But she has some knowledge of, like, alchemical ingredients and, like, brews potions for fun or something. I don't remember what her name is. It starts with an A. I'm going to call her Annie the Alchemist. So Annie the Alchemist, now hilariously enough, I do remember her last name as Hanault because there is a farm in Rivenspire and Elder Scrolls Online that's Hanault Farm, and I remember running by it and being like, oh, I wonder if these are her ancestors. Oh, what's her first name? So anyway, Annie the Alchemist lives in Lilmoth. And she's there with her dad. Her mom is dead. It doesn't really matter. She mentions her a couple times, but there's nothing important about that. So it's just her and her dad. Her dad works for the Empire. I can't remember if he's like a merchant or like a diplomat. I don't know. He has some sort of ties to the Imperial City. I should mention, so this takes place after the Oblivion Crisis, but before Skyrim. I believe it's 4E100 or somewhere in there. So it's like 100 years after the Oblivion Crisis, 100 years before Skyrim, just to give you kind of an idea. That's a rough idea. So it is in the 4th era. Oblivion Crisis has happened. That is important for things that happen in this book. So Lilmoth, the Empire, after the Oblivion Crisis, is pretty much pulling out of Blackmarsh. They held on to it way too long, in my opinion. There's literally nothing there. The Argonians don't really care if they're there. Now the Argonians want them out. It's just dangerous swampland. I don't understand why they had an outpost there to begin with, but whatever. So they make mention in the book that there used to be like a whole imperial settlement and most of them have moved on because there's nothing there anymore. The Empire's not giving them any support. So Annie the Alchemist is gets along with her dad but doesn't love what he does or something, and she's like, oh, we're probably gonna leave pretty soon, and that's her whole thing in the beginning is, oh, I wonder if we're gonna leave Lilmoth and where would we go? I've been here so long, I've been here since I was a kid. And then we're introduced to the second character of our ensemble cast, and he's an Argonian. He is the least annoying of the 4 main POV characters, and yes, I'm surprised as well that I'm saying the Argonian is the least annoying character. I know, I'm sorry, do not leave me a comment. I hear you furiously typing right now. I know that the Argonians are extremely popular. I don't care about them one way or the other. I like some of their lore, I think is really cool. Most of it I'm just not for me type of thing. I could probably count on one hand the amount of Argonian characters in games that I genuinely like versus ones I'm totally indifferent to or that I find super annoying. So I am not a fan of Argonians. I totally understand that they are super popular with most Elder Scrolls fans, so I get it. I'm probably insulting somebody here by saying that I don't like them. In fact, my brother and I have an ongoing joke. When Elder Scrolls Online Blackwood was coming out, the lore master at the time has this like interview thing, and he's like, and we're gonna be getting into Argonians, and you know how much I love my Argonian lore. And my brother and I will frequently say that as a meme to each other because neither of us likes the Argonians. So sorry if you do. I'm not trying to be mean to them. I just do not really care. But this guy, he's the least annoying out of the four, so he gets a pass. I don't remember his name. I don't know, exposits much plot, we'll just call him for right now. He is friends with Annie the Alchemist. They've been friends like their whole life, and they hang out a ton, and he's like, oh, are you gonna be leaving? And she's like, I don't know. So that goes, we kind of get some insight at the beginning of the book into like their relationship and like what's going on in Lilmoth and the Empire as a whole. That's where we start. So throughout this, they're talking. Exposits much plot mentions to Annie the Alchemist, he's like, hey, you know, I feel like something's about to happen. The history is just kind of giving out these vibes that like something's gonna happen. I don't know, you know, none of the Argonians really have an idea what's coming, but something's weird and I'm a little concerned about it. And she's like, oh, that's really weird. I don't know, I'm not an Argonian. So there's that kind of like setting something up. Ooh, what could it be? So we kind of cut now from them, if I remember correctly, over to our third POV character, because I'm pretty sure they set that up and then they go back. So we jump over to the Imperial City, and we get some characters introduced, including the third main character. I don't care about him. I think he has like 2 character traits, and that's it. He feels like an NPC. Well, honestly, all the characters feel like NPCs in this, but he's not that interesting. He's the Emperor's son. I don't remember his name. The Empire is based off of Romans. We're just going to call him Roman. So Roman is there. We get introduced to him, but he's not like super interesting. What I did find interesting about this section of this book was because of where it takes place kind of in the timeline, we actually get some conversations between like advisors and the Elder Council and the Emperor talking about stuff that's gonna become important in future lore. They have this whole thing that I really loved where one of the advisors is saying like, hey, you know, none of the emissaries we sent to the Somerset Isles have like been able to make contact with any of the rulers there, and it's really weird, and they kind of like shoot us out of there. We're trying to make sure they were okay after the Oblivion Crisis because we haven't heard from them, and they're just being really standoffish and weird. And the Emperor's like, yeah, whatever, they're so far away, I don't really care, which, as we know, is a huge mistake given that pretty shortly after this, the Thalmor kind of introduce themselves, and they even make mention, there's actually a really creepy line that I loved in this where he mentions like, oh, we'll just send like another group and send some blades there to like see if that will like prompt them to talk to us, which is really eerie knowing that the Thalmor don't like that and end up years later, well, doing their we're done with the Empire by cutting off the heads of all of the blades and shipping them back to the Imperial City. So I really liked that section because knowing what's coming, it's like, ooh, that's eerie. But beyond that, we get some like random insight into Roman. Again, he's not interesting. He's kind of dumb and naive and like kind of knows what's going on in the Empire, but not really. And he wanders around and talks to some people, and you kind of get the sense that like basically people are just nice to him because he's the Emperor's son. Like nobody really likes him, which I don't know, could have been interesting, but I've seen it done better in other stories, so I just don't really care. There's like this whole thing where basically people are letting him like win fights. They're like throwing fights during training so he feels better about himself or something. I guess it's interesting. I don't really care. I was way more interested in the nods to other Elder Scrolls things. So, Emmerich's back. He would like to say, hi, what? What? No, you cannot sit with me. Everyone, this is Emmerich. one half of the duo. The other's name is Nathaniel. Yes, they're named after High King Emmerich and his brother Duke Nathaniel. Cat interlude, excuse me a moment. You cannot sit with me. Hi. So that's what's happening in the Imperial City. I think that there's a couple more things because I think there's like 2 or 3 chapters, but that's all I remember as being important about that part. Again, I thought the stuff with like the mentions of the Thalmor without naming them was really, really cool. I really liked that. Other than that, it's like some random character stuff with Roman, but I don't really remember it well enough to go into great detail. So then we flash back over to Lil Moth with Exposit's Much Plot and Annie the Alchemist. And we've kind of like jumped ahead a couple days if I remember correctly. And Argonian dude feels like something's about to happen like any moment now, so he's getting kind of freaked out. I can't remember the other part that I really liked in the book. I think it's in Lil Moth. I could be wrong. It could have been in the Imperial City. Anyway, I can't remember which location it's with and which character, but there's this crazy guy in the town, and everybody's like, oh, he just showed up. He keeps talking about like how something bad is coming, and he even told so-and-so that he was like a Psijic mage, but like that's insane, right? Like why would a Psijic mage be here? Like he's just a crazy person. And I can't remember which city it is in, but either the Argonian or the Imperial guy go and talk to this crazy guy, and he kind of comes across as crazy, but he warns them about what's going to happen in these books. This guy gives the warning, and they're kind of like, I don't know if I believe you. Everyone says you're kind of crazy. You know, are you really a Psijic mage? And he's being kind of standoffish and weird about it, which, you know, if he is a Psijic mage, that makes sense because they're not really supposed to interfere unless it's something like really bad. But then they're like, I don't know if you're telling the truth. And the character that was talking to him like goes to leave, and then they turn around and the guy is gone. And I loved that scene. That's probably one of my favorite scenes in this book because, one, you don't know if it's a Psijic mage, but given that what he's predicting does happen and the fact that he's just gone in the blink of an eye, I loved that. And it does kind of fit the MO of the Psijic Order, where they're like, hey, we're trying to warn you, we can't be like super interference that goes against it, but this is bad enough where we're going to try and warn as many people as we can. But of course, nobody ever listens to the Psijic mages. Life goes on. But I loved that scene. I thought it was really good. I'm pretty sure it's the Argonian that talks to him, but I could be wrong. It could have been Roman. I don't quite remember. So anyway, back at Lil Moth. The Argonian thinks something weird is coming, and the history's now gone quiet, and people are like freaking out about it. Meanwhile, the few Imperials that are left are like, yeah, we're gonna peace out of here. We're pretty done with this place. Nothing's going on. The Empire, you know, isn't doing anything for us, and also Black Marsh sucks. Fair. And, oh, I have to talk about the mechanical bird. Okay, Annie the Alchemist is a very frustrating character. When I first heard that there was going to be an alchemist as one of the main characters in this book series, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You know, I could see some really cool, interesting things they could do with her. They don't do anything interesting with her. In fact, I end up hating her just because of a plot later that ruins this book series for me, which we will get into. But they just didn't do anything interesting with it. She uses her alchemical knowledge a couple of times, but it's very much just like, oh, we gotta move the plot along. Well, Annie the Alchemist can now just do this thing, and this is now what's happening. It's very weird. She also has this mechanical bird. And the mechanical bird belonged to her mom. And they make a point of saying like, oh, it almost looks like Dwemer technology, but not quite, because nobody's ever found anything that the Dwemer made that looked like a bird, and how would the Dwemer who live underground know what a bird was? You might be listening to this if you haven't read this, and you're thinking, oh wow, that sounds really intriguing. I wonder what they're going to do with it. Nothing. They're not going to do anything with it. It's just a thing that she has, and it has like a piece that like pops out that's like a lens. I don't know, for some reason in my head I kept thinking of like a makeup compactor that like opened, you know, you had like a mirror and then your makeup. I don't think that's what it's supposed to look like, but there's like a lens that pops out, and if one person has the lens and one person has the actual bird, they can like see each other and talk to each other. It's a cool idea, but it's only used as a plot convenience when they need it to be, and you never find out why her mom had this, where it came from, how it really works. Like, is it magic? Is it Dwemer? I would have much rather, considering that she was a Breton, I would have much rather, since they weren't going to explain it anyway, had her have some ancient, like, magical artifact and make an offhand comment that, like, oh, my mom's family is like this old magic family, and you know, she didn't have any magic, she wasn't a mage, but it's been passed down through the generations, and it's a two-way communication. Because there's tons of stuff in Elder Scrolls that are two-way communicators that are not mechanical birds that nobody ever explains to you. So at this mechanical bird, I'm gonna go off on more of a tangent than I already just did about it, with a crazy theory that gives me an excuse to blather on about Elder Scrolls stuff. But the mechanical bird has to be brought up because it becomes extremely important for the overall story of these two books. So she has this mechanical bird, it's a two-way communicator, it was her mom's. That is literally all you find out about it. I think she gave it a name, and I don't remember what it was. It's not like alive, but it does make sounds. It's very strange. I'm now gonna go off on a crazy tangent about a random theory I have about this mechanical bird, because again, it's a really cool concept that doesn't go anywhere. So if you want, you can skip the next like 5-10 minutes as I blather on. Alright, fellow Elder Scrolls fans, let's go off on a side quest of a tangent/theory that has absolutely nothing to do with the book review, but gives me a chance to talk about some lore stuff for no reason. So the mechanical bird is mentioned as being kind of like a Dwemer device, but not. And when I read this, again, I thought they were going to do something interesting with it, but they never really explain it. Which I guess is fine, because there's lots of stuff that's unexplained in Elder Scrolls, but it's still kind of irritating. So when I read this, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I even looked up on the unofficial wiki, like, if this was a reference to maybe one of the really early games that I hadn't played that I didn't know about. It's not. I couldn't find any other reference to anything like this. But fast forward to Elder Scrolls Online Clockwork City DLC, which is amazing, first off. But in the Clockwork City DLC, spoilers for Clockwork City DLC, Nocturnal is breaking into the Clockwork City for a bunch of reasons. It's a Daedric plot, what can I say? And some of her spies are crows, like real crows that can talk. And in that DLC, Varuni, who's one of the Clockwork Apostles, and I know, yes, I know, I remember this NPC from Elder Scrolls Online's name as Varuni. And I don't remember anybody in this book's name. I realize the irony of that, but the thing is, I don't care about these characters. I actually liked Varuni, so I do remember her name. So Varuni makes mention that, this is toward the end of the storyline, she says that she's never actually met Suthasil, and she would love to have a chance to have just one conversation with him before she dies. You know, she's read all of his like teachings and stuff, but she'd love to have a conversation. And she makes mention of some questions she would ask him if she had that chance. Some of them are like important, and then she makes an offhand comment about, I would ask him why there are no bird factotums in the Clockwork City. Why wouldn't you have us have something so wonderful? She grew up in Clockwork City, so she's never seen a bird. So for her, seeing the crows, even though they were Daedric, was like mind-blowing. Like, oh my gosh, here's this thing with feathers that like flies around the sky, what the heck? So this seems like just flavor text because, okay, she saw a bird, she's obsessed, why don't they have birds in Clockwork City? However, should you be absolutely insane, like Bellz The Moonclaw here, and you kind of research, well, Clockwork City and all of that, the factotums, the like more person-looking robots, they actually have a feminine mechanical voice, and occasionally they will, when they're malfunctioning, spout random things like sunlight through glass or torch bugs in a jar. Random stuff that doesn't really make any sense, and they're like, that's when they're glitching basically. But if you read all the lore books and you kind of piece it together, you figure out that they actually, well, one of the theories, and one that I believe is true, they actually have Suthisil's dead sister's memories, and that's her voice that they're using as well. It's kind of implied that, I think that he maybe soul-trapped her to avoid her dying, because if you don't know, the entire settlement where he grew up got completely destroyed by Mithruna's Dagon back like ages ago, like early First Era, or even before that. But it sounds like if you piece it together that like those are her memories, so it's random things that she remembers, like knee abrasion, lullaby. And one of the things you can overhear the factotums talk, because if you like crouch down and listen, they'll like say random things, is broken wing, which is a bird. And then if you go to, I know this is a tangent, if you go to the planosphere where Suthisil stores all of his memories as like stars basically, and you hang around in there, you can overhear some really interesting conversations from his past and like different things. It's really, really cool. You can actually get a lot of insight into lore and stuff that happened, like with Nerevar and his kind of relationship with the other tribunals. It's really interesting. But if you hang around in there, you can actually hear a memory of his sister, and she says something along the lines of, "Oh, don't cry, Syl. It just hit the window. Everything dies. It's just something that happens. Would it make you feel better if we buried it?" Now that it hit the window and died, plus broken wing, makes it sound like a bird probably hit a window when he was a kid, probably traumatized him to see it die. Also, he's kind of obsessed with like ending the problem of like dying and the world ending. That's like his whole thing. So I think there's no birds in the Clockwork City because of that being such a traumatic kind of experience for him. And again, I could be making all of this up, but it's interesting to think about. Now, fast forward, if you were to, I don't know if anybody even remembers Elder Scrolls Legends. It was this card game. No, not Tales of Tribute. That's a new thing. Elder Scrolls Legends was like a card-based game. I don't know. I never got to play it because it was only available on certain like platforms, and I couldn't figure out like even how it really worked. But if you're able to find some of the lore from that, they actually dropped a ton of lore in there via the various expansions and stuff. And one of them was Clockwork City based, and it talks about the Clockwork City prior to Skyrim. So after this book, but before, like very shortly before Skyrim takes place. And basically it's like telling a side story of some stuff that happened in Clockwork City, and there's like an adventure there. But what's important is in this spot in time, there are mechanical birds in Clockwork City. In fact, if you look up artwork, you can find one with some flying. Now this tells me that probably Varuni or somebody was like, you know what, I'm just gonna make the birds because I want mechanical birds in Clockwork City. But when I saw that artwork, I immediately thought of this book and the mechanical bird, and I was like, what if, and I don't think this is true. I mean, this was written before any of that, so I'm pretty sure it's not. But I was like, what if that mechanical bird somehow got out of Clockwork City and her mom ended up with it? Which is a way more interesting story than this. But anyway, that was my tangent excuse to talk about all of this, of what I think the mechanical bird might be. But it's kind of cool to think about that maybe it's Dwemer but not, because it's a clockwork creature. And there are instances where stuff either gets into Clockwork City from the outside world, like accidentally, or vice versa, things get out of Clockwork City accidentally. So it's kind of cool to think about that maybe this bird came from Clockwork City, and that's how it ended up there. I still don't know how Annie the Alchemist's mom got it, or like how it works or anything, but that's my very long side quest tangent on the mechanical bird and my fake backstory for it to try and make it more interesting than just a two-way communication device. Okay, side quest tangent done. Welcome back. Now, back to the book. Back to what we're supposed to be doing here. So, we're back in Lilmoth. She has this bird, which, remember, is important for later. And I can't remember exactly what happens, but another thing that I like, honestly, the first The first part of the first book is probably the best out of this series because it has so many lore references and kind of callbacks to real Elder Scrolls things. Lil Moth finally, I can't remember if it gets attacked or they find them around the history nearby, but the Anaxali actually are communicating with the history. For those that maybe don't know, the Anaxali are also from lore. They are a militant kind of revolutionary group of Argonians. They came about after the Oblivion Crisis because the Oblivion portals opened in Blackmarsh, but the Hist had been recalling all of the Argonians back to Blackmarsh and preparing them for this. So when the Oblivion Gates opened, the Argonians absolutely wrecked the Daedra to the point where the Daedra were like, nah, it's not worth it, close those portals, screw Blackmarsh, we don't care. It used to happen a lot in history. A lot of people get to Blackmarsh and then they're like, that's not worth it. So the Anaxali kind of came about after that. That was the group of Argonian warriors who fought the Daedra back so much that they saved Blackmarsh. And they're kind of a political group, kind of a mercenary group type of thing. They're very powerful, they're very respected, and they're from various Argonian clans, but they go by the Anaxali. So the Anaxali are praying or working with the history near Lilmoth, and they are calling on some ancient thing to come forth from Oblivion. And I don't remember exactly the circumstances that happen at this point, but this is kind of the inciting incident portion of the book. So they are calling forth the name of the book, the Infernal City. This city is actually named like Umbriel, I think. I don't know, it says it on the back here somewhere. Whatever. I mean, it's a kind of a cool name, I guess. It's kind of generic. I don't know. I'm going to call it the Floating Death City because that sounds better and more exciting. So they call forth the Floating Death City, and it looks basically like this. There's like a city you can kind of see on top, but it's like this floating landmass, and it comes out of Oblivion. Now, briefly, I just want to touch on this because I do know some people had kind of a problem with this, that it came from Oblivion and, how did that work? But the thing to remember is this is after the Oblivion Crisis. So the barriers in the Veil are weakened because there is no Dragonborn ruler on the throne, and the Amulet of Kings is gone. It's broken, it's been smashed, fought back the Daedra for the Crisis, but that makes the liminal barriers between Oblivion and Nirn weaker. The other thing to remember is this is not an actual Daedric prince doing this. This is the Hist with some Argonians acting as agents to get it into Nirn. So they're kind of circumventing the rules around that by it not being a Daedric prince. The Cold Harbor Compact that Suthisil made with the Daedra is still in effect. I could go on a whole tangent about that too. But that only applies to Daedric princes directly interfering, and since this isn't a Daedric prince, I don't think it's a lore break to have the city come from Oblivion. I think it's like special circumstances, so I give them a pass on that. You could probably make an argument that this is a lore break, but it didn't really bother me. The histories are kind of weird anyway, so I didn't really mind it so much. So the Floating Death City comes out of Oblivion, and it's like big and dramatic, and oh my gosh, and you're like, okay, here's the inciting incident. And some like fighting happens or something, and then they discover that the Floating City, the Floating Death City, drops zombies, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it. Sure. Sure. So it drops zombies and they fight, and everybody that dies as the Floating Death City passes over dead people, it raises them from the dead. So it's just a never-ending army. I will say this is a cool concept, but it's hyped up so much in the beginning that it almost feels like it's it's one of those things of that something kind of stupid and unrealistic is going to happen to prevent this from happening to the world, because it's almost hyped up too much that it's this powerful, and it kind of obliterates all of Lilmoth and the surrounding Murkmire area in less than an hour. And I kind of had a problem with that just because it felt too powerful, so you knew that there was going to have to be something really ridiculous that would happen to kind of turn the tide, and I would have liked it to be a bit more subtle. But, I mean, I don't know. I guess the Elder Scrolls series has stuff like that where it's like, oh, this seems really bad, you know, and then, you know, the hero comes and turns the tide. So I guess it's okay, but it did feel a bit weird, especially given that our main characters are not like some prophesied hero like the Nerevarine or the Dragonborn. So it was a little bit weird for me. That is a complaint that I have with this. It's kind of a cool idea that as the shadow of the city like passes over, it like raises the dead. That's kind of a cool idea. I like that. But it gets to the point where basically everything's obliterated and everybody's dying, and Annie the Alchemist's dad dies. Oh, boo-hoo. I don't even remember his name. Who cares? And her... Okay. Her solution to get her and her Argonian friend looks at Sun out is to brew a potion that she somehow knows how to do that can make them fly. Now, I know that there's a ton of things in the Elder Scrolls series that can make you float or fly. I understand that. But I had a little bit of trouble with this scene. I remember rolling my eyes when I read it because while it's been established that Annie the Alchemist knows alchemy, it's not been established that she can frickin' brew something that can make somebody fly. It feels very like, really? Okay, sure, fine, whatever. So she like throws this together and gives it to her and looks in Sun, and they like float to escape, but they get like caught in, I don't know, like some wind that pulls you toward the city, and they like get sucked up into it, I guess. It was weird. It was very strange. So they are now on the floating death city, okay? So we're gonna have to check in with them a little bit later. Right now, meanwhile, we're going to flash back to Roman, who's doing some stuff. So, meanwhile, Roman's doing some stuff. I'll be honest, I don't really remember. He's outside of the Imperial City now with like a group of people. I don't quite remember what they're doing. They're on like a mission of some sort. I don't know. It's not important to the rest of the story. It's just to get him outside of the Imperial City so that he can get caught up in this adventure. So he's with this group of people. The only part of this section of the book that I really liked was it mentions different Khajiit fur stock, which is cool. Like it mentions the ones that don't have fur or have very short fur that look almost human. It mentions a senche. It's just really cool to see that. I'm more used to it now because Elder Scrolls Online has the different fur stock in it that you can run into a lot, and of course there's a whole Elsewhere expansion, so it's not as novel now. But when I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is so cool. I'm glad to see like this referenced more. So it's not something that, you know, it's mentioned, but this goes into it in more detail, so that was really cool. But they're outside the city. I don't remember what they're doing. They're doing something, and then for some reason, a bunch of the people in the group, like, betray the prince, they betray Roman and a bunch of the other Imperials. I cannot for the life of me remember why. I was racking my brain before doing this video because I was like, surely this is an important thing. Surely I'd remember. I don't remember. I don't know. So they, like, kill all the Imperial guards that are with them, and then they're like, they do this really stupid thing where they like decapitate one of the guards like after he's dead, and they like take the prince's like signet ring off and like stuff it on his dead body, and they're like, now they'll think you're dead. And I'm like, maybe at first glance, but like how much, even without the head, how much did that body look like the heir to the throne? Also, this is a magical world. Normal people maybe won't have some sort of magical autopsy, but I feel like probably the Emperor's son would. So I feel like this ruse is maybe not the stroke of tactical genius they think it is. But for some reason, rather than like try to ransom the prince or just like kill him because they hate the Empire, For some reason, their plan is like to sell him into slavery. I cannot remember what is going on in this section. It feels very much like it's just an excuse to get him where the story needs him to go. So anyway, he's like doing that, and then he ends up somewhere. I don't remember where. Somehow, this section of the book is a blur. Somehow, he ends up with the mechanical bird, okay? Annie the Alchemist has the makeup compact lens thing. So, they can now communicate. Yeah, they can. They can now communicate. Hi. So they can now communicate. He also, during this time, ends up somewhere where he meets our fourth POV character, who's this generic, old, grumpy, dark elf guy. I'm going to call him Gramps because I don't remember his name. He's so generic. He kind of, sort of, almost seems like he's going to have an interesting backstory, but they don't, like so many things in this book, the author doesn't do anything with him. All of the main characters feel like NPCs. They feel like they have 2 or 3 character traits, and that's like all there is to know about them. It's very disappointing, but that's a personal preference because I have trouble connecting to a story that I don't feel like the characters are interesting in it. And it's also very disappointing when you're dealing with Elder Scrolls, which has some absolute insanity and also has some really rich characters in it, and then you get kind of these characters who are not very interesting. It's a bit of a letdown. And I cannot remember for the life of me, like, how these two meet. Like, he gets out of being, like, sold into slavery or something, so that whole plot, like, does not matter. And somehow he gets the mechanical bird and he meets Gramps. And Gramps starts out just being there to explain. He's a quest giver, okay? He's the quest giver for the main quest. He explains about what he's on a quest for and decides that for some reason Roman's going to help him, I guess. So given where this is on the timeline, we have to talk about the Dark Elves. We have to talk about Vardenfall. And again, I'm sorry if anyone is going to be upset. I'm going to make fun of them a little bit, okay? So I'm sorry. I hear you typing. I have to because of where we are in the timeline, talk about this. And this is kind of Gramps' whole motivation for it. So, you ready? All right, here's what his quest is that ties into our main quest. So, after the events of the Morrowind game, of course, the Tribunal is dead, missing, whatever. They're gone. Well, we don't know where Vivek is. Whatever. So they're gone, and that leaves Morrowind basically reeling. Makes sense. Their entire establishment, government, religion, it's all in upheaval. What do they do? Now, they kind of flounder for a while, and then the Oblivion Crisis happens, and that's a whole thing. So, totally understandable that, like, things are very chaotic in Morrowind. We have to talk about Vivek being the ultimate toxic relationship here. You know Vivek City on Vardenfell? You know Big Rock in the Sky? Yeah, so there's multiple legends about how that happened, but all of the legends agree that this rock was flying towards the city, and Vivek, he was like, nah man, stop. And he was like, see how powerful I am? Now, instead of being an all-powerful living god and like chucking it back into space, or maybe like gently setting it down and being like, problem solved, no, he decided, you know what, I'm gonna leave it floating precariously above the city. And then, my absolute favorite, he tells the people that, see how powerful he is, but if they ever stop loving him, then his power will wane and that rock's gonna fall on them. Seriously, that was what he told them. You can look it up. If they ever stop loving him, that'll decrease his power and then the rock will fall and crush them. That is so toxic. So toxic. Oh my gosh, I imagine Imagine Sooth the logical one came to visit his friend Vivek and was like, hey Vivek, what's with the rock up there? And Vivek was like, oh yeah, I stopped that with my godly powers, and you know, if anything ever happens to me, it's gonna fall. And I imagine Sooth the said, you do know Vardenfell's an active volcano, right? Like, if that falls, like, everyone is going to die. And Vivek was like, yeah, it's fine. Doesn't it look cool? That's the conversation I imagine happened. And that's why Sooth does not leave Clockwork City anymore. That's what I think happened. But anyway, so with the tribunal gone, Vivek missing and or dead, that rock, of course, is eventually going to fall because he is not there to actively keep it in the sky. And now, I know what you're thinking. Well, it hasn't fallen right away. Like, it wasn't instantaneous. So, that's not a big deal, right? You can come up with a solution for it or just, like, evacuate the city. It's all good. Well, let's talk about that. So, when this happened and the Dark Elves realized, hey, this is bad, that's going to fall eventually because Vivek is missing, what should we do? Did they, A, evacuate the island of Vardenfell before it started to fall to save everybody or save as many people as they could? Did they, B, get some help from other mages around Tamriel, swallow their pride, and ask some people for help for some magical solution to this? Or did they, C, do something absolutely insane? If you guessed C, you are correct. They did something absolutely insane. Now, that insane thing wasn't even asking a Daedric prince, hey, can we make a deal with you? Because that would have been bad enough. No. They decided that with the limited amount of time that they had, they would build some sort of machine contraption thing that literally sucked souls out of sacrifices to power it to keep the rock in the sky. Why? Just evacuate the Vardenfall. What? And then, now remember, this is not me making this up. Gramps is telling us this, okay? He's explaining that this was their master plan. And in addition to this, the machine required, like, a lot of souls. Like, it wasn't like you sacrifice one person and it keeps it up for a day. No, they were sacrificing people left and right. So everybody's already dying, just evacuate the city. Like, I don't understand, just evacuate the island. So they're sacrificing people. They realize, hey, we need people that are either powerful mages because they have more power in their soul, or like important people because their souls are bigger. So they start like running a lottery basically of who like gets to die, and Gramps' wife is like selected, and she's like, it's my duty, I will do it. And he's like, oh no, I don't like this all of a sudden. I've been okay with it for months, but now it's a problem. And so she like dies or something, and his like friend slash rival, he figures out that like he knew all along that this wasn't going to keep the rock there, and so like he's evil. So Gramps' whole thing is like, I'm going to go kill this guy who used to be my friend because my wife's dead and I'm sad about it. And also, gee, if only there'd been some way to know that building this machine that sucks souls out of people was a bad idea and wasn't going to hold the rock there forever. Well, shoot, I wish someone had told me that before we did that. So that's his whole thing. He wants to get back to Morrowind, kill this guy, and stop this or something. It's a revenge plot. That's his whole thing. And for some reason, Roman tags along with him. Sure. That's where we are. Somewhere around in this general area, we jump over to book 2. I don't remember how this one ends or how this one starts. It's somewhere around in here that the one book ends and the second one starts, once we like basically have all our characters where we need them. But a couple of other things that I don't remember exactly where they are, it's somewhere in this section or before or after, that I want to talk about. And one of them is really sad because there is a brief thing, I think it's in the second book, there's these couple of chapters that are from the point of views of characters who, well, they end up dying, so they don't matter. It's like 2 or 3 chapters of them, and honestly, their chapters are probably the best part of this book, or this book series, and I'm kind of sad that it was so wasted as just a throwaway thing, and they're not referenced at all again. And it tells me that that this book series could have been a lot better, because they get as much character development, these 2 characters who die, as the rest of the cast does. So I don't understand. So that these 2 characters, one is an Imperial soldier, and the other one is an orc who has joined the Imperial army. Again, this is a callback to Elder Scrolls, where a lot of orcs do that to get out of their strongholds and see the world before they go back home, because it's considered somewhat okay for them to do that because they're fighting, and so sometimes it's like a little gray area that they can like still travel but still be, accepted back home. And these 2 characters start by like not really liking each other, but they're in the same battalion. That's not the right term. I don't know, they're in the same group of fighters, and they're dealing with the floating death city is coming, and it's a really good set of chapters because they pretty quickly realize that this is an unwinnable fight, because every enemy they fell just comes back. Anybody that gets killed comes back as a zombie, and they have a really cool thing where they don't ever really like each other, but they're fighting side by side and they learn to respect each other. And again, this is like 2 or 3 chapters. Their storyline is much, much better than a lot of these other plot points that happen in this book. And I really enjoyed those couple chapters, and I was actually like disappointed that when they died, like I knew it was coming because they're right, it's an unwinnable fight. But, it was a really good thing, and that tells me that this author can write some stuff, but again, I think part of the problem is that this should have been a single book. Because as much as I love those 2 to 3 chapters, they're not really needed. You could cut them out, and there's a ton of stuff coming up that we're going to talk about that could have definitely been cut or severely shortened. So that is a section that has absolutely no bearing on the story. I think it's there to mostly show you like how helpless the world is or whatever. But it's a really good set of chapters. I really enjoyed reading it. I liked those 2 characters, the way they like learn to respect each other in the battle, and then they kind of are accepting of the fact that they're going to die, and they're like, oh, I really don't want to get risen as a zombie. That kind of sucks. Hopefully, I won't be conscious of it type of thing. So it was a really good set of scenes. I enjoyed it. But again, it's not needed. It could have been cut. A lot of this stuff could have been cut. But let's check in with our characters. I'm going to say that we're in book 2 now, because I'm pretty sure most of the stuff we're about to talk about does happen in book 2. So we're in book 2, The Lord of Souls. I laugh that the Imperial City is on the cover of this, because I think the Imperial City appears like in 2 scenes. Like it's in the first book more, but it's still a really cool picture. I have to say, the covers on these are really cool. They are. Yeah. Another thing to talk about is how half of the world doesn't think that a floating death city is coming, because it started over in, Murkmire, which is kind of the edge of nothing. Actually, there's a map over here. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but Murkmire is basically right there. So, yeah, it's got a ways to go before it's going to get to anything. So there's been some, I think throughout the first book, it travels over Black Marsh towards the Imperial City. So you're kind of getting reports, but basically the Imperial City especially is this sounds fake, which honestly fair. I think if I got a report that a floating death city was headed my way, I'd be a little skeptical too. So that's kind of where they are. They're like, I don't know if this is real, seems fake. Okay, let's send some scouts to go check it out. That's the precursor to the scenes I was talking about before. So that's something to keep in mind as well. This starts with them not believing that it's actually happening. So this book, all right, let's talk about it. Clip's Mini Coupons and Annie the Alchemist are on the floating death city. Now at first, I was all for this. I thought this was going to be really cool. Here's this floating death city that came from Oblivion. They can see that there's a city up there, so, what's going to be on there? They're going to be just crazy Daedra. What kind of crazy lore are we going to get? Well, I have much to say about this. It starts not bad. They end up on like the underside of the floating death city, like the part where you can kind of see on the first cover there's like waterfalls and like vines hanging down. That's like where they end up. And they immediately run into like the poor people. I'm sorry, that's me. The poor people, the slaves of this death city. Now, there's some cool concepts here, but the logistics of it just really boggle my mind. There's basically a very harsh class system in place on the floating death city. I don't think that that's needed for the story. I understand what the author was going for, and I have a theory that a lot of the stuff that was taking place in this book on the floating death city was, I have no proof of this, but my theory is that this author, he wanted to write a story about a floating city with this class system and some of the like lore that he adds in, and nobody wanted to publish it, or it didn't get picked up right away, and he crammed it into these. I don't have no proof of that, but that's what it felt like, because there's an inordinate amount of time spent on this, and it does not matter. So the floating death city has a harsh class system. There's the poor slave people on the underside, and their jobs are really dangerous. They like go down into these like water trench root things to like get rare ingredients. And then there's like the working class people, and then there's like the elite on top. I don't understand why a floating death city that makes zombies has any of this, but sure, okay. It also doesn't really make sense with Oblivion. I feel like the warrior class would be the top class, if anything, but again, whatever, it's fine. And Clips Mini Coupons is like, oh, well, you guys, it's really dangerous for like you normal people to like swim down there, but I'm an Argonian and I can like hold my breath and swim really fast. So they're like, oh my god, you're so good at this, cool. And he's like, yeah, we're from down below, do you know what's going on? And like, it's this whole thing. We meet a bunch of characters that do not matter, that work in like these water root trench things. And there's like a bunch of time spent on like the injustices of the floating death city. And again, I understand what they're going for, but I don't care. I'm way more interested in the fact that it makes zombies as it passes over like living people. Like that is way more interesting. Why are we focusing on this? And this takes up so much of this book. The floating death city, I wish that whole thing had been cut out. So long story short, because I don't remember the series of events, but Annie the Alchemist and Argonian guy, they decide to, I can't remember, one of them is for it, one of them is against it, and they have kind of like a fight and a falling out. They're gonna like do an uprising. Now, I just need to talk to you about this. If I found myself on a floating death city and I didn't really want to draw attention to myself, or I didn't know anything about the politics yet, I wouldn't get involved in a revolution. I'd be like, yeah, no, I don't know enough about this world to know. You know, now of course, they're on the right side, but I would have been way more interested if the group that they got in with at first were like the bad guys. That would have been so good, because they just instantly trust these people. They believe everything about them. They feel sorry for them. I can't remember. I think it's Annie the Alchemist who's like, this is a bad idea. We should be keeping a low profile. But it might be the Argonian, because I feel like reads many books. This is when I started to like him, because I'm pretty sure he was the one who was like, no, he should like keep a low profile. But regardless, they decide that they're going to join in with this revolution on the floating death city that they just got to a few days ago. And of course, it goes horribly wrong. And long story short, all of those like slave characters, most of them end up dying horribly, because of course they can't take over. And Annie the Alchemist and Reads Many Books get separated. And that's what you need to know from like the whole first part of this book. And so the Argonian guy kind of stays in the lower areas, but he's now like injured and in hiding from this. And he has a girlfriend, a friend, I don't know. It's so silly. She's described as looking like a dark elf, but different. or something along those lines, and I don't know what that means. What does that mean? I'm not sure, but we're just gonna call her Dunmira because she is very unimportant to the plot for the most part. She's just kind of there to be the Argonian's foil, so he has somebody to talk to since Annie the Alchemist is no longer like with him. And it's like, okay, interesting, I guess. So the whole thing that you kind of learn throughout this book is the Floating Death City has something like a history on it. It's like a cousin of the history. So the history has the hist as the collective, all those trees, are thought to be originally from Oblivion. There's some kind of sentient Oblivion trees. And there's one of those on this Floating Death City, and that's how the hist and the Anaxili were able to contact the Floating Death City, was because the history talked to this other not history that's like a distant relative species. And because of that, if you die on the Floating Death City, your soul kind of gets like put through the cycle similar to how Argonians are reborn, but don't remember that they're reborn. It's like a soul cycle thing, and they might have some flashes to their old life, but everything else will be different. They'll look different, they'll have different names, they might have some weird dreams and stuff, but they'll be a different person. Same thing happens on the Floating Death City. If you die, you get sort of cycled back through and reborn, and once that happens, like, you can't leave the city, you're trapped on it. People who try to leave just basically, I think, just disintegrate. So the thought is that this Floating Death City used to exist in Tamriel, and that's why there's like Dunmira, who kind of looks like a dark elf, and there's some people that are sort of look like a Dremora, but not. Again, it's kind of a cool idea, but I think I would have rather that they just made it a whole different Daedric species that like looked really cool and interesting. I think I would have preferred that because it would have kept it feeling more alien, but whatever. You just have to keep that in the back of your mind for something stupid, interesting, that happens later. So Annie the Alchemist ends up in sort of like the middle area. And we're going to go back to her because this is the spot that really made me not like this book. But before that, Roman and Annie have figured out that they each have a piece of the bird and they can talk to each other. So they've been like keeping each other. I can't remember when that happened. I think it happened before. That was the other thing that I wanted to talk about that I already forgot. So they can talk to each other, so they've been kind of keeping each other updated on what they're doing. And he believes her that there's like a floating death city, and he's like, well, that sounds crappy. And he asks Gramps about it, and Gramps is like kind of weird about it, like he knows but doesn't know. I don't know, it's weird. It becomes somewhat important later. And so he's like, well, hey, this guy seems to know. I'm going to travel with him. We're headed to Morrowind. And it looks like the Floating Death City is like kind of headed that way. So maybe, I can figure something out. And she's like, okay, cool. And so they're like talking, keeping each other updated. And, okay. All right, let's talk about Annie the Alchemist storyline in this book. She ends up in the middle section, as I said, and this takes up so much time, and basically every time I would flash back to her, I would kind of skim and then like skip it, because it doesn't matter and it takes up way too much time. This is like the working class, I guess, of the Floating Death City, and Annie the Alchemist kind of proves herself that she can like do alchemy, and so they're like, oh, okay, you're not totally worthless. Well, cool, come in here, this is like the kitchens, and this is where pretty much the rest of her story takes place, and oh my gosh, okay, so the kitchen area is, instead of like gold or fighting prowess, the upper class consumes things like food, and that's what everybody below them does to keep them happy. So basically their economy is based on eating things and taste. Okay, sure. I guess that's interesting. Can't say I've seen that in anything else before. But this leads to just a lot of nonsense. She gets working in these kitchens, and their whole thing is the nobility of the Floating Death City get bored really easily and want new experiences. So, and again, this is kind of a Daedric thing. They're eccentric. I'd buy it. But it doesn't go anywhere, and it feels really out of place in this story because, again, we have a Floating Death City in Tamriel, but we're spending time with this. So she's there and she's working these kitchens, creating new flavors and tastes to try and make the nobility happy. Well, also, you know, if you screw up, then you like die. So she's trying not to die. She's secretly communicating with Roman to like try to give intel. And you think that that's going to be important, that she is like giving intel and somehow that's going to come back. But no, the intel she gives is really basic stuff and it does not matter. This part of the story goes on and on and on and on and on. By the time I was done reading this book, I was so tired of the words flavor, taste. Oh my gosh. I don't know if the author was like on a diet and was hungry, but it is ridiculous. I cannot stress to you how much of this book is nothing but her in the kitchens, creating random things. Why? I don't care. Why is this in this book? And then there's this whole weird subplot where she like makes this friend, but then they start having a rivalry. And then this other, it's like very catty. It's so stupid. And then this other girl is like, and then figured out that you're like hiding something. And she's like, oh crap, that sucks. And they're like arguing and fighting and it's like a rivalry, but they're also trying to make the best flavor ever because of this. And there's like 7 types of flavor and she has to learn them. And there's like salty and sweet and spicy. And then there's a mysterious flavor. What could it be? Oh my goodness, if she can figure it out, she can get out of this situation and one up her rival. It does not matter. Why are we doing this? This isn't Elder Scrolls. What is this? Oh my gosh. So finally she like basically gets this rival who was honestly a little bit of a bitch, but didn't like cut her hand off or anything. She gets this girl like killed, which does not affect her at all. She has like 2 lines about how she kind of feels guilty, but is like, well, I had no choice. It's like, you absolutely had another choice. So she tricks this girl into like wearing her clothes and then like frames her for something, for like theft. And this other person just dies. This rival catty girl just dies because of it. And in the process, Annie the Alchemist figures out that the secret flavor is actually no flavor at all. What are we doing? What are we doing? We keep flashing back throughout the whole storyline to this while other stuff is happening. And it's so dumb. Also, really weird, but one of the like generals, one of like the big bad generals on the Floating Death City is like in love with Annie the Alchemist. And that we have to deal with that plot, and I don't care. I couldn't care less about that. Could not care less. That's what Annie the Alchemist does for almost the entirety of this book. Once she's on the Floating Death Island, it's just a lot. It's just over exaggeration of food and taste and flavor, and it doesn't matter. I originally thought maybe they were going to do something really cool where she was like going to figure out, I don't know, a secret poison and like poison the main bad guy and be like, ha, I killed the Floating Death Island from the inside. Yeah. No, that doesn't happen. And then I was like, ooh, maybe she'll figure out that like people on this Floating Death Island are deathly allergic to something that's really common in Tamriel, but they don't have it in Oblivion. And that's, you know, gonna turn the tides. She's gonna tell Roman and he's gonna be like, oh, I know what to do now. No, none of that happens. The intel she gives him is basically, oh, there's a really bad class system here. It's you know, the injustices, and here's the names of the bad guys. Wow, cool. That's great. That's really great. I'm really glad that we spent so much time on this for that. Thanks. So now that I've ranted about that, and that is really the reason that this book is below average for me, was that section. It was such a slog to get through. And those scenes are interspliced through the other characters' scenes, which makes it worse almost, because you'll be doing something with one of the other characters and then you'll flip to a new chapter and we're back in the kitchens with Annie. And it's like, oh, please, no more, no more. So anyway, that's what she's doing. Back with Roman and Gramps, they are traveling to Morrowind and they end up, I can't remember where, I think it's near Bruma, if I'm pronouncing it like Martin Septum. They're somewhere near Bruma, I think, because they're trying to get to Morrowind, and they come across this like lodge up in like the mountainy snow things, and I think it's near Bruma because it's run by like a Nord family, and this is kind of a weird like scene. Like they've been traveling. I'm cutting out a lot of Gramps and Roman traveling because it's not important. All they do is argue with each other. Gramps acts superior. Roman realizes he's dumb and doesn't know anything about the world, and that's basically the gist of it. Like, cool, that's a lot of their storyline here. So when they finally get to this spot, I'm like, cool, at least we've made some progress. We're getting somewhere. And this is a really weird scene, though. This family that runs like this lodge inn thing was like, oh yeah, you can definitely stay with us. But if I remember correctly, somehow they figure out that like he's the emperor's son and they don't like the empire, so they plot to kill them for some reason. But don't worry, not before, oh, I didn't mention this. So I didn't mention this because it's not important, but one of Roman's 3 character traits is that he likes women, basically. He has tons of like girlfriends and stuff, cool, whatever, it's not important, who cares. But he ends up like sleeping with the maid there or something, and then really, okay, this is so stupid. The only reason I'm bringing it up is for 2 stupid reasons that this leads to. So he sleeps with this maid that works at this lodge, right? And he has the mechanical bird, right? He's been talking to Annie back and forth, and Annie like opens up her like lens, her compact, her makeup compact to like give him an update on what's happening on the floating death island, and she like sees him like asleep in the same bed as like this random maid woman, and she gets really upset about it. And I'm going to do a dramatic reenactment of me when I read this scene, because she's crushed. She's heartbroken that he is with another woman. And I'm like, girl, you've not even met him in real life. You've had like 3 conversations via a mechanical bird. So this is a dramatic reenactment of me reading that scene where she's totally crushed and heartbroken. But the dumb continues, because he wakes up and this maid, now that they've like, you know, had fun times together, is like, hey, by the way, the guy who runs this lodge, oh wait, is this the guy's daughter? Is it a maid or is it his daughter? I don't remember. But anyway, she's like, hey, by the way, yeah, he's planning on like killing you, so you might wanna, and Roman's like, oh, that sucks. Yeah, I should probably go, thanks for telling me. Great. And her whole motivation for that is because he showed her a nice time, I guess. What are we doing? And then he realizes that like he left the mechanical bird open, and the next time he talks to Annie, she's like super hostile and like, as if you even care. I'm like, you're not, oh my God, you're not dating. What the heck? So then he is like, oh, she probably saw that I was like with that other girl. Oh, I feel bad now. And I'm like, for what? You're not together. You are talking through a mechanical bird. You only know each other's first names. You don't know anything about each other. What? What are we doing? So apparently they're in love. Sure, why not? Okay. So he and Gramps leave this place. I think there's a fight that happens. I guess it's just, I swear it was just to have an action set piece because nothing else is happening. And, you know, Gramps realizes, hey, traveling is taking a really long time. Duh. And he says, you know what? I've got an idea of how we can, you know, get to the floating death city. Because, oh yeah, I should probably mention, I think they get to Morrowind and they like talk to some people there and yeah, no, they do because, yes, okay, no, they do. I remember now. Okay, let's talk about that because that happens first. So they get to Morrowind or they get near Morrowind and they hear that the guy that, remember, Gramps was like rivals with and is mad because his Gramps' wife died, and this guy knew the soul machine wasn't a permanent fix and was going to require like way more souls than he like pitched it as needing. I think he was the engineer who built it actually. And they get there and they learn from somebody somehow, I don't remember how, that guy is now on the floating death city. I really wish I could remember why or how that happened, but I do remember that being a thing. He's like one of the big baddies. He's like the main bad guy, but it's not just him. I can't remember if this is revealed now or later, but I'm going to tell you guys now. So while that guy's kind of the main bad guy, the true main bad guy of this is actually Umbra. Now, I loved this twist, and I was like, okay, maybe this book's going to end up really pulling it out because that's cool. So Umbra is a sword that has a consciousness. And this sword, long story short, Clavicus Vile decided that he needed a sword for some reason. And he commissioned it to be made, but he was like, hey, I don't want it to be just any sword. I want it to be super duper powerful. So he stupidly put some of his power into this sword, and it developed a consciousness. And he and the sword do not get along because Umbra basically wants to be independent. It wants to be its own creature, but it's just a sword. So throughout history, anytime Umbra gets somebody to wield it, it kind of corrupts them slowly and slowly takes them over and convinces them, hey, listen to me, you know, I'm gonna help you. And usually this is an unwilling participation, like Umbra slowly makes them crazy and they lose themselves to the sword. And Umbra's whole thing is it basically just wants to create chaos because while it has some consciousness, it is still based off of Daedric Creatia, which is nothing but chaos. And so it just wants to kill, it just wants to create chaos. This, however, Umbra has connected with somebody that willingly has the same goals. And so they're working in tandem. This is an awesome idea. I loved this. And I can't remember if it's revealed here or later in the book, but I was like, that's a really cool concept. Like Umbra the sword finally finds somebody that's like, hey, you know what? Yeah, I agree with you, Umbra. Let's mess some stuff up. Let's go be crazy, chaotic agents together. Love that idea. A little disappointed that it's only in this book, and like I would have much rather it was in a game that I could play through that quest line because I think that that would have been better, but that's okay. Love the concept. So I can't remember again if that's here that they learn it or if it's later. But that's the main bad guy, is Umbra plus evil guy holding Umbra working together. And they're in control of the floating death city. So Roman and Gramps, they're like, hey, we gotta get to this floating death island because there's nothing that any of the ground troops can do. They're all dying. The city is getting closer and closer to the Imperial City. We gotta do something. So Gramps is like, okay, well, if we get sucked up into it, we're probably gonna die because that's what's usually happening to people. You know, Annie and the Argonian only got out because they had that flight potion, so they kind of circumvented it. And he's like, but, I have an idea. Gramps is like, since it's part of Oblivion, we could travel through Oblivion, use some secret gateways I know about, and we could get on the floating death island. How do you think this goes? How do you think this goes, this plan. Do you think that it's that easy? No, of course not. It goes horribly wrong, because of course it goes horribly wrong. This is a terrible plan. Also, I'm pretty sure that Gramps is not even a Telvanni wizard. I don't know if they mentioned what house he's from, but I'm pretty sure that I was reading this and I was like, are you a master wizard? Are you Debate Fear? Because if you're not, I don't think this is gonna work how you think it's gonna work. But that's his plan. Now, to Roman's credit, he's like, this is a terrible idea. No. And Gramps is like, nah, we're gonna do it anyway. It'll be fine. So before we talk about that, I did forget one thing that's kind of important, I guess. We gotta go back to Floating Death City, and we have to talk about Annie the Alchemist and Pixmany Flowers. So they're separated for a large portion of this because she's doing the whole thing with the food and taste and flavor. I don't remember what the Argonian is doing for most of this time. I think he's just like bonding with some of the people. Anyway, he realizes that like he finally gets kind of up on the city and is finally like, hey, I can talk to Annie the Alchemist again. And he's like, whoa, you're kind of getting like way too obsessed with this. Also, you totally got that girl killed. And she's like, I have no choice, I have to. And he's like, oh, I mean, I feel like you probably have a choice, but okay. And again, this is why he's the least annoying character, because I was kind of agreeing with him that, yeah, it's a bad situation, but he made some really valid points. And so somehow I believe they're trying to do like their revolution still, even though it went poorly before. And he's like, hey, I really, you could help us because you're in the middle tier. Like you could, give us information. Maybe we can make a real change here. Bring the island down. And she's like, no, that's too risky. And if I get caught, like they're gonna kill me. So somehow it comes about that she has to, I can't remember exactly, but it comes about that she has to like basically turn him in to keep herself safe. And I just felt like this part, yes, I understand like where she was coming from, but it really felt like there were other options to explore. So it's just a very unlikable character move from her. But she doesn't like want him to die because her and him didn't get sucked up into the city the normal way. She's pretty sure if they kill him, like he's dead. And because he's so far away from his history, he probably won't be reborn in that cycle either. So she feels really badly about it. So we're about to go into the other stupid thing that I mentioned way before in this video about alchemy. She apparently has enough alchemy knowledge to brew a potion somehow. She convinces him to take it. I can't quite remember the circumstances around that. But the potion makes it so that when he dies, and he does die, that so he dies and she like takes his body back to like her, I don't know, apartment. I don't know. She has like a little room in the city, whatever. And she stuffs it in like a bathtub. Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but it's really funny. And after a couple of days, she goes in there and she like pries open his mouth, and there's like a rock in there, and she like takes the rock out, and she's like, now he'll be reborn. I remember reading it and I was like, WTF, what is happening? So apparently that potion she brewed and had him drink, yeah, apparently it made him have some connection to the Death City. So now this rock grows into an Argonian egg and he'll hatch from it. What? Now, she did this because she doesn't want him to like die. But how does she have the knowledge to do this? What? Is that a thing? Like, I know that the games have made kind of jokes about Argonians and like how they die and live in eggs and stuff, but like I'm pretty sure this is not. What? So anyway, Fights with Attitude is dead now, and okay, he's gone. He makes a brief appearance later, I guess. But he's pretty much gone to the story. So there you go. So now we're down to 3 POV characters. So anyway, Annie the Alchemist can do that. And she's really broken up about it. She's like crying and stuff. And at this point, I just am so done with her like storyline that I did not care. Like I was sad that Gives No is dead, but I was like, okay, sure, whatever. I'm game for anything at this point, book. Okay, so that happened. He's now gone out of the story for a very long while because his egg is growing out of this rock or something. Meanwhile, we have Roman and Gramps, and they're going to try and travel through Oblivion to get onto the Death City. And this goes about as well as you'd expect it to, in which case I mean poorly. So they end up, this part of the story is kind of cool. They go to a couple different Oblivion realms, and some of them are like, had been referenced in games before, and other ones were like kind of made up. So it's like a series of little scenes where they end up in different Oblivion realms. It's kind of cool. I liked the concept of it. It was another thing that was very welcome after all of the stuff on the Floating Death City that didn't feel like Elder Scrolls. Going back to something that felt like Elder Scrolls, I was like, yay! And they end up throughout this series of like traveling rapid fire through these realms. They get separated at one point, and Roman wakes up in like this stone cage type area. Like it looks like a prison, and he's in there with an Altmer. And of course he immediately is like, oh, this Altmer's really hot because it's a girl and he's obsessed with women. I'm like, oh my god, can you please not? Can you please not? You are trying to stop the end of the world. So he starts talking to this Altmer lady, and I immediately got sus vibes from her. I was like, there's something sus about this lady. Like, what is going on? And she's like kind of getting info from him. She's like asking him questions and stuff, and he's like an idiot, so he's like telling her all this stuff. And, you know, he's like, hey, how do we get out of here? Like, I gotta find my friend Gramps. And she's like, oh, I don't think we can get out of here. Like, I don't know how long I've been here, but it's been a long time. And finally he mentions something about like Umbra the Sword and the Floating Death City, and suddenly the Altmer woman gets like super upset and is like, what are you talking about? And he's like, what? And this is actually a really cool scene. The Altmer woman slowly shifts, and it's actually Malakath, who had tricked him into telling him like all this stuff because he was like, what are you doing in my realm, basically? Rude, right? I love this scene for a couple of reasons. One, even though I found the Altmer woman sus, I didn't expect it to be Malakath. So when that happened, I was like, oh, that's cool. I also love the subtlety that he chose a Altmer as a human guise, because he used to be Trinimac, who was a elf, before he was transformed into Malakath, which is more of an orc appearance. So I liked that too, that like, kind of low-key, he still sees himself as like an elf, an Altmer. So I liked that. And Malakath is his normal charming self and is like, look, you gotta get out of my realm. Also, do not bring trouble here. I don't want to deal with Umbra. That's your problem. Do not bring that here. Get out of my realm, and good luck, you're probably gonna die. And then he like boots him out, basically, which I love because, yeah, Malakath ain't got time for that. He doesn't want to deal with Umbra. Nobody wants to deal with Umbra. So I did like that scene. He gets reunited with Gramps, and they finally make it to the Death City. So we're getting close to the end now. We're getting close to the end. Now, at this point, I was a little bit more excited to continue reading. For a lot of this book, it was a slog to get through. But when I got to this part, I was like, okay, it feels like it's the ending good. There is some pacing issues at the end here. It starts slow, like they're on the Death City, and they keep telling us like time is of the essence because it's getting closer to the Imperial City, but it doesn't feel urgent. And then all of a sudden, the big confrontation happens, and then it's over. And that was I did not like the pacing on this final bit. It's not a bad conclusion, but I didn't like the pacing on it at all. So let's talk about the conclusion of this, and then of course the ending of this book series, and then final thoughts. So the conclusion. We get there, Gramps and Roman are now on the floating Death City. And at first they're kind of trying to be stealthy about it because they don't want to get caught, but I'm pretty sure like that does not last and they end up just like running through the city. Yeah, okay. And at this point, Annie the Alchemist has gotten herself basically found out by the main bad guy, and he's like, yo, have you been talking to people back there? And also, how did you get on my Death City without becoming like a zombie? And she's like, so he's like, okay, something's up with you. So he's like captured her in like the main, I don't know, it's not a throne room, but it's like the top of the city, and there's like some sort of well of souls or something up there. I don't remember. There's like, it's a whole thing. There's something up there. And he's like, okay, you're obviously up to no good. I'm gonna hang on to you and figure something out. And I'm like, okay, I really don't care actually about her, so sure, whatever. So finally, Roman, Gramps, and Annie, along with the main bad guy, who I don't remember his name, let's call him bad guy, and Umbra. Well, I guess we can just call him Umbra, because the sword is Umbra. Umbra the person, Umbra the sword. It's like Dagoth the person, Dagoth the building, Dagoth the mountain. I guess that works. So they're all in this room, and of course, bad guy got a villain monologue, so Umbra's like, this is all just, part of my master plan. I want to be my own entity. I don't want to be attached to Clavicus Vile. He's a jerk. I want to basically create my own Daedric realm, and we're going to have blackjack amusement parks, all of that stuff, because it's going to be mine. But to do that, I have to like absorb enough souls or something. So sorry, Tamriel's gotta go. And they're like, wait, that was like your master plan? And he's like, yeah, dummies. Why'd you think I made the soul sucking machine? Like I tricked you guys into making that so I could get souls. At least I'm pretty sure that was his plan. Or like he was grabbing the souls before they could keep the rock in the sky. There's some sort of connection there. And they're like, oh, gee whiz, bow. Oh man, this sucks. What are we gonna do? And oh yeah, I have to talk about one of the stupidest lines of this book. When they first end up all in the main room, Annie, of course, is captured. She's like, I don't know, in a cage or something. I don't care. Roman sees her like across the room, and he recognizes her because they've been talking via mechanical bird. And he has this dumb line about how, like, I remember this line because it was so stupid. He has the line when he sees her, because it's from his point of view. He sees her across the room and he's like, there's a woman that I would die for. What? Reading that and I was like, are you kidding me? First of all, you've had 5, maybe 6 conversations via mechanical bird. 2, bro, the world is at stake. Also, I'm really glad you're concerned with saving Annie the Alchemist. How about Tamriel? Are you concerned about saving Tamriel? Is there nobody there that you would want to die for? Oh my gosh, and I remember that line. It's been 6 or 7 years and I remember it because it was so stupid. And it was so out of place. It's like we're at the big battle, the climax, and that's the line we're given. What? Anyway. So villain monologues, tells him what the plan was, how, Umbra kind of orchestrated a lot of this to happen. He kind of convinced this history from the floating Death Island to talk to the history back in Tamriel. Like, he orchestrated a lot of this just for the selfish goal of wanting to basically become his own Daedric prince, was kind of the vibe I got from it, which is kind of, again, it's a kind of a cool concept. And the mortal is working in tandem with him, which makes him stronger, because usually the host of whoever has the sword is like fighting against it. But because they're both on the same page, they make a very dangerous foe. Now, again, again, the pacing for this part is very rushed. By the time you get to this part, it's so close to the end of the book that I was a little bit concerned. I was like, ooh, I feel like this maybe is not going to be a very good confrontation. And it goes on for a little bit, but it's not. It also, like for me, I know that none of the characters here have any chance of like actually beating Umbra in a fight. So it just feels really kind of dumb. Like Gramps has some magic and Roman's swishy with the swords, but we've already established that like he's just okay as a fighter. And so there's a little bit of a scuffle. And then I can't remember what exactly gives them the upper hand on Umbra, but finally Gramps like basically tackles him off of like the ledge into the Well of Souls, and that like supposedly destroys Umbra the sword. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And the guy that was the host and Gramps, and now like the floating death city is like slowly being sucked back into oblivion because it like it can't maintain its thing there, because I think the Well of Souls was like in or on the history that was on there. I really wish I could remember this better, but I can't. It obviously wasn't impactful enough to stay with me. So that's what's happening. So now Roman and Annie the Alchemist are like, we gotta get off of this floating death island because it's about to like get sucked back into oblivion, and obviously we don't want to be here for that. So I don't remember exactly. For some reason I think she uses the flying potion again. She might. And they get off of it, and they get back to the ground enough to see it like disappear back into oblivion. And that's kind of like the end. Then there's an epilogue. Let's talk about Umbra being destroyed. It's not destroyed. I understand that the book goes to great lengths to tell us multiple times that this is like the end of Umbra, but a couple things. One, Umbra does have some of the same rules that apply to it as a Daedric prince. It's created off of Clavicus Vile's actual chaotic creation. Like, he used a piece of himself to imbue this sword. So, to me, that means it has the same rules as a Daedric prince, or at the very least, it has the same rules as a demi-prince. And we know from, like, Knights of the Nine, with Umaril the Unfeathered, you have to go to their realm and have enough power to kill them. Like, Umaril couldn't even be killed with the power of 8 divines. It had to need the 9th one, and you had to go to his realm to kill him, and I'm not even sure if that actually killed him either. So Umbra is probably not destroyed. I feel like even if they destroyed the actual sword, the essence of Umbra is probably still around, because there's never been an instance of a Daedric prince dying. They've been mortally wounded. You can ask Mithrinus Dagon, like the 5 times someone has found out one of his super secret names and used it against him. But there's never been an instance where one of them like dies. So I know some people that read this were like, oh, I'm really sad Umbra's gone forever. I'm like, Umbra is not gone forever. It probably could come back. I would be shocked if it didn't, and this actually did kill it. That's kind of weird to me, but okay. So anyway, that's my take on Umbra being dead. Now let's talk about the ending of these 2 books. So the ending kind of wraps up with a bunch of Tamriel still does not believe that there was a floating death city, and the Imperial City is basically already concerned with, their power being kind of diminished, and so they're like, yeah, we're not going to make an announcement to everybody that this happened, because that seems like a really bad idea. Only certain parts of the world know about it, so we're just going to kind of gloss over it, because we don't want people thinking that any of this happened, especially not so soon after the Oblivion Crisis, which I kind of get with that. Like, yeah, you probably should have told people, but it makes sense in the context of where this is in the timeline and kind of the whole circumstances of it, that they probably wouldn't want to tell people. So I get it. Roman's kind of upset about that though, because he's like traumatized, I guess, from it, which is fair. Gramps is dead because he like tackled the guy off the thing. And then there's this really weird scene where, like, Annie the Alchemist and Roman are, like, in, I don't know, the Imperial countryside, like, in the Cyrodiil countryside, like, riding a horse, and then they, like, sit together, but they don't, like, have a really good conversation. They kind of talk a little bit, but it's just a really awkward scene. And I think it's supposed to be because both of them are, like, sad and changed from their experience, but it's also implied that, like, they're dating, and I do not get that at all. It also is very weird to me that, like, obviously Roman has to go back to the Imperial City because he's the Emperor's son. But I would have liked there to be something about, I don't know, like maybe Annie had always wanted to, like, visit someplace. Maybe she always wanted to visit Rivenspire, where that farm is, for her last name. Or maybe, like, her mom, like, you know, saw the city of, like, Skingrad, talked about how pretty it was, and so she wants to go see that, you know, now that she doesn't have a home in Lilmoth anymore. Something to give her some other ending than just she's hanging out with Roman because apparently they're in love. Like, it was just really weird. I don't know, I don't like that. Sure, whatever. So they're both, like, changed by their experience and they're hanging out. Cool, great, whatever. And then the final scene is it's actually not a bad scene. We get to see the Argonian guy, and in his reborn form, because remember, the rock became an egg out of his corpse, and now he is now connected to the Floating Death City's history. And he's sitting with Dunmira, remember her? Yeah. They're sitting together, like, in the branches of the part of the city that was, like, naturey, and apparently the entire city is in, like, an upheaval from it getting sucked back into oblivion. It's in a completely different oblivion realm now, and kind of the classes are all fighting with one another, and it's kind of an upheaval, and he's, like, trying to stay out of it, and Dunmira's like, yeah, it's gonna be a whole thing, like, probably for centuries, whatever, this happens. And so they're sitting there, and he's like, well, you know, this isn't so bad. You know, it's okay. I've made some friends here. I'm alive. You know, I just have to make the best of my new life, basically. And then it ends with her mentioning, she, like, kind of points off, and she's like, don't you think that looks like a city out there? And the Argonian guy says, yeah, it does kind of look like a city. Maybe one day I'll go explore it. And she's like, I'll come with you one day. And I kind of liked that ending. It sort of implies that they're in, like, an oblivion realm where maybe there's, like, something else, or, you know, it leaves it open to having further lore at some point. So I actually did like that scene, and I believe that's the final scene in the book, is that one. So let's do our final thoughts now on these books. Final thoughts. Again, are these good? No. Are these bad? Also, strangely, no. Again, I give them a 2 out of 5. I think if the stuff on the Floating Death City was trimmed or cut completely, it'd probably get a 3 out of 5 from me. I felt like they were a little below average. I think that there's a lot of cool stuff in here, but there's also a lot of just unnecessary plot lines or just really stupid things that I'm like, what? I also did not care for a lot of the characters. They felt very flat. They had 1 or 2, 3 character traits, and that was it. And again, part of that's just because, you know, these are Elder Scrolls, and I kind of expected a set of novels that are based in the Elder Scrolls series to be at least as in-depth as in-game lore books. But there's in-game lore books that are better than these. I mean, you have 2920, the last year of the First Era. That book series is one of my favorite in-game book series, and it's also one of my favorite series. I actually own it in one of these hard copy collections, and I've read it like 5 times. I think it's super well written. So if you have not read that, I don't think these are available anymore, unfortunately, but they're in game too. You can read them. I think that's a better, like, novel series, and that's in the game. There's other ones that I really like. The King Edward series is kind of fun as like a fantasy thing that's like has some Elder Scrolls stuff, and the characters in that are more interesting in this. Again, that's an in-game book, and I think it's in Daggerfall, but you can look it up online. So for me, part of it is my expectations. I think we're a little high with these because it is Elder Scrolls, because they are official canon tie-ins. I know that this author has written some other fantasy books. I have not read them. I don't know. I mean, the style of writing is okay in these. I didn't hate it. I don't think it's like that exciting either. I don't know how his other books are. I'm kind of curious to try one just to see. But overall, I think these are a little below average for me. I think that there's some really cool stuff. I love the possible Stygic Mage. I love the Umbra tie-in. Umbra's a super interesting character. I liked a lot of the Elder Scrolls references, of course, were awesome, and, you know, just having it be in that world. But overall, it's a little disappointing. I also think that, like I said at the beginning, could have been one book. There's a lot that you could have trimmed or cut completely and made it slightly longer, you know, thicker than these, and made it one book. And I think it would have been a lot better as a standalone rather than stretching it out to make it a duology. And that part in the second book with the, oh my gosh, the kitchens and the cooking and the flavor and the taste, I cannot stress enough how much time that takes up for virtually no reason. And if this was not an Elder Scrolls novel, I would have not finished it because of that. That part of the book just really slowed the whole thing to a crawl, and I just did not care. And it really impacted, you know, the ending, because I had to sit through all that. So I warn you fully when you read it, and I don't know, maybe that's just me, maybe other people really liked that part, but I just was like, no, this ain't it. So, hopefully you enjoyed this very long video. I might have to split it into 2 parts. We'll see when I get to editing it what that looks like. But that was my sort of meme review of the Infernal City and the Lord of Souls. Let me know if you want me to review some of those in-game books. There's a couple that are amusing. We could do a list of those, and we could also talk about some of my favorites if you're interested. And maybe if I reread these soon, I will do a non-meme review of things that I'm sure I forgot. And I'm well aware that there's probably a ton of stuff I forgot, and maybe even got some stuff wrong. Again, I haven't read these in like 6 or 7 years. So take this review with a grain of salt. And also know that these character names are not their real names. But hopefully you enjoyed. I had a lot of fun getting a chance to talk about these, and hopefully I will see you all in the next video. As always, I'll do the YouTuber thing and say to like and subscribe, but really you don't have to, it doesn't matter. This channel is strictly for fun so that I can share some Elder Scrolls stuff. So thank you so much for joining me for this very long meme review of the official Elder Scrolls novels, and I will see you next time. I need to warn everybody, I'm out, basically. And they're like, okay, I don't know if this guy's telling the truth or not, but... Really? Really? How was that? Well, it's proof that this is empty.